Okay, welcome back. I think I messed up a earlier live, but I just want to read through the chapters of how Suzanne Blum took over the life of the Duchess of Windsor. I'm going to read chapter 10 today, The Tragic Untold Story of the Duchess of Windsor. It's entitled Behind Closed Doors. It's written by Hugo Vickers, and you can find this book on Amazon, and it is about $30. I have not found it on Audible for anybody that is interested, so that's why I'm going to take the time to read it. The first part is a very dreary story of how, the Duchess's life was after the Duke died. She was on feeding tubes. She was isolated. She didn't really trust anybody in the royal family. She didn't trust Lord Louis Mountbatten, who had reached out to her. Prince Charles was still young when he had died, and he was going to college. He was in the military. He was, of course, trying to date and meet women, but he really actually would have been a very good one to help, you know, help her out. And by the time she died in 1986. Of course, he got married in 1981, and he already had his two children by the time he died. But if she would have allowed Prince Charles, I believe, to help her out, I think that would have been a different story for her. Because when the Duke died, she just became very ill very quickly, and she was very vulnerable, and she was kept on feeding tubes and isolated no matter what. She did have a good set of friends, but friends aren't family, as we know, when it comes to taking care of the elders. But this is going to be some interesting chapter reading because it talks about the machinations of Blum. And she started to take over from 1975 to 1977. So it's a rather long chapter. I may omit some boring parts and just read the juicy parts, but I'll go ahead and get started reading. In widowhood, Maitre Blum had married the retired French general, George Spilman. One day, she brought the general to the Duchess's house. They arrived by taxi. The general looked around and said to Blum, "My dear, this will be the apotheosis of your career." By the time she had finished with the Duchess, Blum had been driven by the Duchess's chauffeur, Monsignor Martin, and she had been twice advanced in the Legion of Honor by Jacques Chirac. In her takeover of the Duchess, Blum was motivated by many things, not least an irrational hatred of the English that had developed during her sole visit to Britain. This extended to the British royal family, though not to the Queen herself. Blum thought the Duchess was going to die while she was in the American hospital. The lawyer wanted to know whether or not any of the British royal family had inquired about the Duchess's health. Miss Schutz assured Blum that she had informed Sir Edward Tompkins, the retiring British ambassador, immediately. The Duchess had gone into the hospital. Since then, nobody from the British court had asked how she was. Walter Lees informed Miss Schutz that Prince Margaret had been in Paris to attend the Soviet exhibition, but there had been no word from her during her visit. Prince Charles and Lord Mountbatten had been silent. On the other hand, the Duchess had received dozens of letters of sympathy from well-wishers all over the world. The Maitre wanted an updated list of those who would be invited to the Duchess's funeral. She was particularly anxious that neither John Utter nor Sir Godfrey Morley should appear on it, even though that was none of her business. The plight of the Duchess was of a long-term concern to the British Embassy in Paris. One of their main priorities was how to handle her death and funeral. The ambassador's private secretary had several files which became operational if a member of the royal family died while in France. There were particular concerns over the Queen Mother, who visited France most years in the early summer, and Lord Mountbatten was another regular visitor. Plans for the Duchess of Windsor, known as Operation Hayes, had been updated in 1972. The Duke of Windsor had agreed to the details of his funeral as early as 1961, with certain changes in May 1962, and again in 1966. In those days, various eventualities had to be considered. John Utter had mentioned to me that arrangements existed for flying the Windsors back from wherever they died, be it Paris, New York, Palm Beach, Spain, or elsewhere. There was also the possibility that the Duchess might predecease the Duke. There were plans for that too. Of particular concern, some variation of procedures may, however, be necessary between the arrival of Benson and the funeral service at Windsor. A few months after the Duke's death, when the Duchess was in a precarious state of health, the procedure to be implemented was reconfirmed. Files being lodged at Buckingham Palace, the British Embassy in Paris, the Duchess's house, the Foreign Office, and in other relevant places. The files stated that both the Duke and Duchess had agreed to these plans, as had the Queen. The Windsors were to have funerals as similar to each other as possible. In the case of the Duchess, there would be no court mourning, only family mourning. Flags would fly at half-mast on government buildings on the day of her death and the day of the funeral. This had been agreed significantly as early as 1961. The court circular would announce the death, but the state bell at St. Paul's Cathedral and the bell at the Curfew Tower at Windsor would not be tolled. There would be no lying in state. An RAF VC-10 would fly the body home. Lord Chamberlain would go out to Paris with others, and on arrival in Britain, it would be met by a Royal Highness. Senior figures such as Lord Lieutenant, a cabinet minister, the French ambassador, and others would be on the tarmac. The Royal Highness would travel behind the hearse to Windsor, where the body would lie at Albert Memorial Chapel. On the day of the funeral, the coffin would be carried into the choir by a bearer party of the Welsh Guards, of which the Duke had been the colonel from 1919 to 1936, and it would be guarded by military knights. The instructions then declared, the order of service will be the same as for the Duke of Windsor, with the omission of insignia, styles, and titles, last post, and reveille. Details were also given in respect to the attendance of the royal family, the interment, the list of mourners, and by invitation. By 1972, the list for the Duchess's funeral had already been agreed by Sir Godfrey Morley in consultation with John Utter. So, okay. This is the funeral. This right here is the funeral of the Duchess of Windsor. She was laid next to the Duke of Windsor. You can see this is Prince Charles and Diana were there. I'll continue reading. In the days before Blum took control, the Lord Chamberlain's office and the British Embassy in Paris honed the small details between them. British ambassadors had entertained the Windsors over the years and accepted their hospitality, Though in 1952 the Duke had complained, as he did from time to time, about perceived incivility from the then British ambassador, Sir Oliver Harvey. Every such ambassador was aware that one day he might have to implement the funeral procedure. The file was on hand for whoever was on night duty at the embassy or standby for crisis that occurred over the weekend. In January 1973, Sir Edward Tompkins had been worried by the Duchess's breaking her hip and noted, despite a good recovery, her general state of health is not good. He was concerned that the press might hear of her death before an official announcement. He is aware that the press will be on the lookout for anything in the arrangements which they can interpret as implied slight to the Duchess even after her death. He was especially concerned by there being no guard of honor planned for her at RAF Benson, and by possibility of comparison being made between the way her funeral was planned in contrast to plans for that of the Duke. He continued, "There's quite a lot of popular sympathy for the Duchess here in France, and I think it will be both appropriate and expected that we should open a book of condolence at the embassy when she dies, in which case the Consulate General will follow suit. It is all possible as a mark of respect. The French will want to provide a guard of honor at the airport when the Duchess's body is flown out. If they do suggest this, do you want to discourage the idea, given that there will be no guard of honor at Benson in the UK?" Sir Eric Penn, Comptroller of Lord Chamberlain's office, encouraged the Book of Condolence, but asked the ambassador to discourage a French guard of honor in accordance with the Duchess's wish. Sir Nicholas Henderson succeeded Tompkins as ambassador in 1975. Aware of the well-prepared program, he maintained contact with the Duchess's office and duly sent presents and messages to the Duchess at prescribed times. He understood that he should keep the royal family informed about the state of her health, a subject about which there was the closest interest. Similarly, his private secretary, Philip Nelson, kept in touch with Miss Schutz, inviting her to events such as the Queen's birthday garden party. He never went to the Duchess's house, but they met from time to time, just as she had occasionally had meetings with his predecessor, Howard Davies. Blum was traditionally suspicious of the British embassy as she was of any other representatives of Great Britain. She was on civil terms with Lord Nicholas Gordon Lennox, whose charm won her over to some degree. He took tea with her occasionally and remembered her as elderly, aggressive, and highly litigious. He recorded that Blum professed profound admiration and respect for our Queen. But the rest of the royal family was beyond her contempt. She reserved a special loathing for Mountbatten. Her hatred for him knew no bounds. Gordon Lennox devoted a lot of time to dissuading Blum from entering into pointless legal action against the press, which he thought would upset the British royal family. At his meetings with her, he was obliged to eat 2 large slices of chocolate cake and produce an ancient maid. It was produced by an ancient maid. The chocolate cake was served on a silver platter, but by French standards, or indeed any other, it was dry and it was disgusting. When Gordon Lennox left Paris in 1979, he invited Blum to his farewell party and introduced him to Philip Nelson, who was to be the new liaison. He told her that Nelson did not get much to eat and had a passion for chocolate cake. "May you be forgiven," mouthed Nelson in response. Blum's intense dislike of the royal family was confirmed by Diana Moseley. Blum and the general once lunched with the Mosleys at the Temple de Ligure, and Blum launched into a vitriolic attack on the royals. Finally, the general told his tyrannical wife to pipe down. Lady Moseley thought it was discourteous to insult the royal family in the presence of British citizens, as the general fully realized. Blum was so against the British that she even tried to persuade the Duchess to give up her annuity, which was £5,000 from the Queen. The Duchess was still well at the time, and she refused. She found Blum's attitude especially odd, since Blum was forever instilling panic into her about overspending. Okay. See, that is that is one of the things that she was so tricky about with the Duchess. She instilled fear, and that is a cult-like behavior to instill fear in people and to keep them attached to you. Blum was full of plans. In January 1976, she informed Miss Schutz that 2 years before the Duchess had given Monsignor Amaget precise instructions, written and oral, about which silver and porcelain objects should be sold, as well as the details of those pictures she no longer wished to keep. Her message was that Amaget would introduce certain interested parties who might buy these things quietly, without publicity, and they would be introduced by him or by Blum's own intermediary. It would be for the best, declared Blum. Amaget supported this plan. On the 6th of February 1976, and again on 26 February, the Duchess was asked to sign new authorizations for Amaget to replace his mandate on 26 June 1974, which did not cover certain points. The new letters would instruct Amaget to continue to sell objects that she might no longer wish to keep, and to have sole control of her interests in Switzerland. The Duchess was well enough to refuse to sign either of these. The unsigned letters still exist. Miss Schultz was worried about the selling and wrote several times to Amaget for some written authorization to make the sales concerned. The end of February, she asked for assurance regarding sales 11, 21, and 24 February that she and Blum had made during his absences abroad. Together with this, she sent a copy of Blum's charges to the Duchess. Eventually, on March 1976, Amaget replied. He began by saying that he was pleased to find that the cost had been greatly reduced, and took it upon himself to thank Miss Schutz on behalf of the ailing Duchess. He was angered by communication from Morgan Guarantee Trust Company in Paris, and he terminated all contact with the bank, while telling Miss Schutz that this must be done without the Duchess's knowledge. In reply, Ms. Schutz's request for written authorization, Amaget explained in light of his 1974 mandate, he was in sole charge of the fortune and well-being of the Duchess, and that he had authorized him to sell any of her assets or belongings, whether they were for her benefit. As we have seen, he was in quest of a new mandate. He told Miss Schultz that he was the Duchess's banker, but in a wider sense, he was also her advisor and intimate friend. He assumed that Miss Schultz knew this after many years as the Duchess's secretary. As before with John Utter, Amaget attempted to reassure her that the Duchess was lucky to be advised by Maitre Blum, and that Blum would be overseeing the sale of any such objects. Amaget went on to say that it was the role of Georgess, the butler, to take responsibility for all the objects of value listed in the inventory prepared by John Utter, and which were located at the Duchess's house in Bois de Boulogne. It would be Georgess's role to suggest to Maitre Blum the items that could be sold. Amaget wrote to Miss Schutz to confirm she was not involved in this process of selling, that her role was to remain as secretary, receiving the information about the sales and when they took place. He stressed that the sale should be undertaken without publicity, maintaining that this was the Duchess's express wish. He did not want staff members getting involved in this. So as you can see, they're selling off her stuff. And some of the stuff they were selling it off at a cheaper price than what they could have been sold for. Okay, next section is written the dismissals. This was the precursor for the dismissals of some of the staff and the bribing of others. Rumors of sales had indeed spread in Paris, and Maitre Blum was furious that it appeared that the Duchess's staff might be responsible for these rumors. And in April, she addressed this issue aggressively, maintaining that the only things she had sold were orchids. She announced a letter that if the staff wished to show their loyalty to the Duchess, there were other ways of doing so, that she would take care of things in her own way, and that since the staff derided her and put perverse interpretations of her actions, she would make no further efforts on their behalf. It was a most unpleasant letter. She began to prepare to get rid of some of them. The summer saw some disruptions in the household. On the 25th of August, Philippe, the sous chef, suddenly left without prior notice. Lucien Massey, the main chef, was still on holiday, so Monsignor Martin undertook the cooking. Oh, he was the chauffeur. Ugh. An arrangement that suited everyone. Georges no longer needed the valet, Manuel, due to retire at the end of the year. He was due to retire at the end of the year, so he was given notice to quit on September 25th. For some time, there had been talk of the Duchess giving up her house in favor of an apartment in the Hotel Plaza Athene, Paris, but this idea was immediately dropped when her health took a turn for the worse at the end of September. Dr. Thynne asserted that the Duchess would never again live a normal life. He was keen that she should move from her house. Perhaps prompted by Blum, he put in writing his belief that the Duchess was aware how expensive everything was, and that worrying about this was one of the reasons for the decline of her health. Again, the Duke left her with plenty of money to be well cared for, instructed his staff to care for her, and all of this was just tricking her mind at a very vulnerable stage of her life. And that is shady, shady, shady to me, in my opinion. This enabled Blum and Amuget to decide that the not inconsiderable expense of employing a staff of 13 could no longer be sustained under such circumstances. This was probably no surprise to the staff themselves, loyal to the Duchess for many years. They had been obliged to put up with much. The house, once in full life with dinner parties, was now virtually asleep. The Duchess no longer leading an interesting life. She was an invalid. Many of them had little to do. The atmosphere had become tense and unpleasant. No one knew from day one to the next who would be staying and who would be going. A state of virtual internecine war was developed between the nursing staff and the kitchen. Yeah, the staff had to be up in arms. And it is very hard when you don't know whether or not you're going into work and you're going to be laid off. So perhaps worst of all, there was Maitre Blum coming to the house and removing the Duchess's possession with the help of Georges. Thus, the axe fell first. The Duchess was sent to the American hospital to get her out of the way. Then it was alleged that Lucien Massey, the chef, had tried to get the Duchess intoxicated, which all sounded like nonsense, although it was certified by Dr. Thynne. Massey was dismissed forthwith, along with Roland Gogalt, the gardener, and Germaine Bauer, all of whom had given 25 years of loyal service. These members of staff left on the 14th of October. Dr. Thynne stressed the news of the dismissal they should be withheld from the Duchess. He was concerned that she would be upset as well as she might have been, nor did the Duchess like to see her advisors taking control and acting independently of her wishes. Amaget was principally concerned that Bloom should handle the legal aspects involved in any dismissal. She was delighted at the consequent reduction in annual costs. Amaget did not think the three dismissed members of staff would have a problem in finding equivalent or better jobs elsewhere. He urged Miss Schutz to calm Germain down, pointing out that it was quite a leap from years of slavery to a life of total freedom. To replace Germain, an intercom system was installed at the main gate so that Georges could speak to would-be visitors from the inside of the house. In the attendant publicity, Blum gave her verdict to the media. She's quoted as saying, "Why have a porter who never has to open the door, or a telephonist who never has to answer the telephone?" One of the problems for dismissed staff was that only those still in the Duchess's employ at the time of her death would receive bequests promised to them in the Duke's will. Maitre Blum took it upon herself to inform them of the arrangements made for them. She also needed to reassure those who were staying. Thus she dismissed on the one hand and bribed on the other. Georges and Ophelia were to be given 40,000 francs and 6 months' salary. M. Martin 20,000 francs plus 6 months' salary. Those departing in the sense paid off. Of these, Roland Gogalt, the gardener, was particularly disgruntled. In December, he attempted to have the Duchess of Windsor taken to court for wrongful dismissal and claimed 66,000 francs in compensation. Blum was forced to pay up. A version of this saga reached the general public when one of the Duchess's biographers, Stephen Birmingham, published his book, Duchess, in 1981. He maintained that it was the mater who dismissed the last 3 footmen, the sous chef, the parlor maids, the gardeners, under conditions which Maitre Blum insists were very generous. Between September 1976 and December 1977, there was quite a distribution of spoils, none of which the Duchess would have been aware of. The gifts were listed on a document signed by Blum and Amaget, confirming the items given. Furthermore, the jewels were listed and as removed from the Duchess's inventory in a document presented by Miss Schutz to Amaget on 12 December 1977. Amaget was given earrings, a bracelet, a necklace. Dr. Thin received watches for himself and his son, 2 brooches and a bracelet for his daughter, and in March 1977, he was given a gold box. In the documentary The Prince Edward made in 1995, shown as Edward on Edward, that was a very good documentary. That was Prince Edward, the now Duke of Edinburgh, he gives very good documentaries. Dr. Thin can be seen on camera claiming that the Duke himself had given him one of these watches and made much of the fact that the Duke's father signed him GRI, which was in fact a perfectly normal way of signing by a monarch of that era. Miss Schutz was given earrings, 2 bracelets, and a ring. Georges got a brooch, as did Victoria Marquess, a cleaning maid, and Monster Martin. Nathan Cummings was given a pair of cufflinks, adorned with a crown of sapphire and diamonds. Blum herself was given an amethyst and a brooch, but did not want this. She received a ring with an oval amethyst surrounded by turquoise and diamonds, an amethyst necklace, and a Louis XV gold box. Amaget received various other gifts during these years. During the Duchess's lifetime, he gave a friend of his, Frau Chamal, a gilded ashtray adorned with WW and a royal coronet. He was also given a tea service from the Duchess's collection. In July 1976, he was delighted to receive a present of some of the Duchess's wines. Meanwhile, Amaget had invested most of the Duchess's Swiss money in gold because it was safe. This proved a wise and profitable investment. Her capital grew immeasurably. Okay, now we are getting down to the sale of the items, because she was selling off items of the Duchess. The sales. Maitre Blum had received a promotion in Legion d'Honneur in 1973 when she promised some of the Duchess's furniture to Versailles and the Louvre. 2 boxes and a red leather chest, the latter originally destined for Lady Ednam. In July 1976, Blum was promoted Commander of the Legion d'Honneur. Miss Schutz wrote to congratulate Blum, describing the honor. An irony which probably escaped Blum. The Duchess was able to add a few words in her own hand, which Blum acknowledged in a prosaic letter of reply as a great display of sympathy, which heralded, she was for sure, the Duchess's rapid recovery. A party was given to celebrate Blum's honor at her home in Rue de Varienne. She asked George to send over all the Duchess's champagne to her house for this party. George himself was in attendance. Throwing a party and having the Duchess of Windsor's champagne sent to her house, that is shady. Waiting on the guests, Miss Schutz was so shocked. So George himself was in attendance waiting on the guests. Miss Schutz was so shocked by this, with the collaboration of George's, she sold the remaining contents of the Duchess's wine cellar for the benefit of the Duchess's budget. The first of the sales had taken place as early as 28 January 1976 during Miss Schutz's absence. By March, sales had produced a total of 186,000 francs. In February, Blum bought a silver tankard for herself. By August, further sales had taken place, raising 2,188 and 292. Oh, that's 2,188 and 292 francs. And 30,000 US dollars. Amaget assessed the total value of the sales to date as being $470,000 in that time. Remember, that's a lot of money in that time, which he deemed but a fraction of the expenses that the Duchess was incurring. There were further sales. Blum's policy was to sell items in the house that the Duchess would not notice should she survive. On a lesser note, the remaining plants in the greenhouse were sold, and the greenhouse heating was switched off on 14 November. After the Duchess returned from the hospital at the beginning of 1976, the message to the staff was that she had to be kept in the upstairs rooms. If she did come downstairs and notice the absence of any items or piece of furniture, she would be told that the French government had asked for that particular piece. It would be returned presently. With luck, the Duchess would not notice, or she would not remember. Needless to say, the items never did come back. As we have seen, visitors to the Duchess were now forbidden. See, this is where she gets tricky. She keeps her upstairs. She locks off her visitors. Nobody can visit her. This was a policy that was said to protect her health and to save her from becoming flustered. Okay, a little bit of that, a little bit I understand, because I know with me, I take care of my aunt, and when she gets too many people, it does get her flustered. But still, all the rest, she really isolated her. I mean, keeping them from bad people who will agitate you, okay, I get that. But keeping her from good friends, that I do not get. I cannot possibly claim to list every sale that took place while the Duchess was ill, and I can only vouch for what happened up to the end of April 1978. Of course, further sales went on during these years, and in the years from 1978 until the Duchess's death in 1986. But the sales listed here are based on documentary evidence. In March 1976, Georges went through some items and selected the following, which Blum later removed from the Duchess's house. On 13 July, Blum sold a gold oval Louis XV box. It was marked EB. The same day, in the same day, she sold the following: an oval box with crystal on it, monogrammed in diamonds, a rectangular box with blue lapis, 3 round boxes with heads of kings, a gold rectangular box, a long, very straight gold box with 3 feathers, 2 rectangular gold toothpick boxes, and an arabesque oval box. On the 30th of September 1976, Blum gave the Louvre a gold box with diamonds and a small rectangular box of pompadour in blue enamel in accordance with the Duchess's agreed donation. On the 20th of October, she took away 2 more boxes, which she kept at the Rue de Varenne as potential gifts. Blum tended to sell things at low prices. Miss Schutz was a better salesman than the lawyer. She went to Kugel and sold an ancient watch adorned with a coat of arms and an owl on a piece of lapis, a Fabergé hippopotamus, a fat frog, a small green frog, a Chinese dog on an ebony stand, achieving 10 times the price offered by Blum's antique dealer. On the 5th of May 1977, the following items were given to Blum, the ostensible purpose being that they would be given a present: a pair of earrings made of rubies, emeralds, and brilliant for Margaret Emaget, a bracelet with round brilliants on platinum, a watch bracelet with 2 snake chains, a gold Cartier watch, a gold cigarette box with a map of Europe inscribed David from Wallis, 1935 Christmas, a gold tie pin with a blue enamel E under a crown, along with various buttons and cufflinks, shirt studs, 2 evening bags, a gold silk, and 11 shirt buttons. He adorned her with jewelry, wonderful jewelry, David. He took really good care of her. So that's my thoughts here. On the 11th of May, 1977, Blum went to the bank with Miss Schutz and took away further jewels destined to be given to the Duchess of Kent and Princess Alexandra, and a brooch of a gold leopard stretched out with black and red enameled inlay to be given to Mille Hivet, a former secretary to the Windsors. By the spring of 1977, possessions to the value of 3 million French francs had been sold. In 1976 to 1977, sale of gold boxes achieved 66,000 pounds in jewelry worth $100,000. In November 1976, Emaget had written to Miss Schultz about a sale of Estee Lauder, recapitulating that he would decide what would be sold and Blum would agree to the items. He, Emaget, was pleased to have escaped any mention in the press and appreciated that Miss Schutz had to some extent, Blum too, were the ones who exposed to the media. Joanna was to continue with discretion and circumspection in the role of secretary and nothing more. Miss Schutz reported more sales in October and November and informed Emaget that Blum had taken jewelry and gold boxes. She had wisely obliged Blum to sign for these. Much of Blum's irritation, Emaget authorized the sale of Estee Lauder and so on August 1977. Estee Lauder paid $150,000 for a ring, and on September 1st, 180,000 pounds was transferred to the Duchess's account with Emaget in Switzerland. Miss Schutz was horrified. at the ridiculous low prices that Blum was getting from her antique dealers. She therefore intervened when Blum was about to let a very fine Misan Tiger dinner set go for $20,000, well below its value, and she arranged a private sale to Nathan Cummings, who accepted the asking price of $100,000 without question. Yet Nathan Cummings, he's the good guy. He was a good friend to the Duchess. Anxious lest her selling activities were noticed, Blum was worried that Cummings might use this set at his dinner parties, that it would be recognized. He did not use it. Instead, he displayed it behind glass in his apartment in New York. Pleased with this and other transactions, in August 1976, Cummings mentioned that he would like to buy the Duchess's Foggia of a small girl, a Duffy of country scene, Utrillo flower painting, two large paintings by Lejour and Capuletti. Blum was also, she used the Duchess's possessions as gifts. It must have been given her a sense of enormous power to distribute the possessions of her clients at her whim rather than the Duchess's. That's shady. She gave the Duchess's items away as her own personal gifts. Some of these have been mentioned above. After the Duchess died, her remaining jewels were sold by Sotheby's in Geneva. As to other jewels which did not survive to the Geneva sale, I identified 3 pairs of earrings, 12 brooches, 11 or 12 bracelets, 2 necklaces, 2 rings, 2 chokers, a vanity case, a tube of rouge, 2 scent bottles, and a handbag, and 2 watches. And so it continued. Okay. This section is entitled The Queen Mother. The Queen Mother came to stay with Sir Nicholas Henderson at the British Embassy between 25 and 28 October 1976 to open the British Cultural Center. In the press at the time, there was a suggestion that the Queen Mother might visit the Duchess, though this was never actually going to happen. It was a SOP to the press. Such a visit have given no pleasure to either party, nor was the Duchess in any state to receive a momentous visit of that kind. Instead, the Queen Mother, ever one to do the right thing, sent flowers with the message, "In friendship, Elizabeth." Miss Schutz was also invited to a reception at the embassy and was presented to the Queen Mother. For a long time, the British ambassador did not see the Duchess because she was unwell. But in February 1977, Miss Schutz telephoned to say that she was a bit better and was ready for a visit from him. Sir Nicholas and Lady Henderson were invited to tea one afternoon at 4:30. He described how they were met by Georges at the door. A butler greeted us looking a little sinister, and how Miss Schutz told them not to accept tea if the Duchess offered it, because it would tire her. She took them to the Duchess's bedroom, as they did, so a nurse sidled out of the room. Georges hovered outside, listening as ever to what might be said. The Duchess was lying on a couch by the window. Her hands, which caught the eyes immediately, were badly contorted in shape, and they were paralyzed. Remember, she had rheumatoid-like arthritis. Our handshakes were perfunctory. Unless we had known before whom we were meeting, I did not think that we would have recognized her. There's nothing in the face to recall the very distinct and dominating look known to the whole world. There was a change of small talk, and the Duchess said she had hoped she would be able to go to America. The ambassador concluded, "I do not think she was in a condition to talk about anything serious." Every now and again, she took a deep breath, which seemed to require considerable effort. She kept her hands under the rug. She was perfectly compos mentis, but it was as though living was a big task and could only be coped with for short intervals at a time. She did not strike one as being comfortable or at ease with herself as she lay under those blankets. At least the ambassador was reassured that the Duchess was alive and could report accordingly to Buckingham Palace. Elvergazan became concerned about the advancing deformity rheumatism from which the Duchess was suffering. She asked Dr. Bruno Vulliam of the Centre de Medicine Physique at Re-Education Fonctionnelle to visit the Duchess, and he did so on the 16th of January. He was concerned to prevent what he called a catastrophic evolution from the point of view of skin and muscular retraction. He proposed a course of action involving placing sandbags on the Duchess's hands, knees, and feet. Elvira Gazan wanted to order 8 sacks of sand of 2 kilograms, each of 5 sacks on one. Bulliman believed this was the only way to prevent further deterioration. When Dr. Thin heard about this, he was furious. He was accusing Dr. Bulliam of professional discourtesy in not consulting him. He pointed out that he had been the Duchess's doctor for 15 years, and he alone would decide what treatment she would undergo. He told William to abstain from further recommendations unless invited by Thin himself. Bulliam told Miss Schutz that following this surprising reaction from Thin, he had no choice but to withdraw, so the Duchess was left to her decline, nor did Maitre Blum sanction any other mooted suggestions for improving the Duchess's health. She seemed they were too expensive. Okay, this is quite. Now we're going to go on to the Duke's papers. In February 1977, an article appeared in Daily Express in which Sir Robert Mackworth Young was as good as accused of having taken the Duke of Windsor's papers to the Royal Archives without the Duchess's knowledge or permission. Blum seized on the idea that the Duchess had been tricked into sending the Duke's papers to Windsor. In fact, the opposite was true. Blum did not know about the orders or decorations that had also gone to England, or she would have made a fuss about them too. Miss Schutz did not enlighten her. Blum obliged Miss Schutz to write to Sir Martin Charteris, then the Queen's private secretary, making accusations on the Duchess's behalf. The Duchess herself was by then completely unaware of any of the issues. Nor was she in a state to be concerned by such matters. It was Blum who instigated the complaints. When the Duchess learned shortly before she fell ill in 1975 of the nature and importance of the documents abstracted from her home, she was deeply concerned, and the article, which appeared in the Daily Express, has proved her fears well grounded. As the documents were removed without either her knowledge or consent, with regard to the papers concerned, no list has ever been submitted to her for approval. The Duchess had previously given her consent for transfer to the Royal Archives of documents of historical importance and was very upset to learn that a number of items, including her own divorce papers, her personal letters, and diaries of the Duke of Windsor, were removed at the same time, a schedule of which is included herewith. The fact that these personal papers have been read, filed, controlled, and indexed without her consent distressed the Duchess. Additionally, Her Royal Highness feels that, judging from the tone of the article in the Daily Express, there appears to be a considerable risk that these papers may be misused or compromise the memory of His late Royal Highness. The Duchess has instructed me to advise you that this interference is quite unacceptable. The papers having been extracted on instruction of Lord Mountbatten, the Duchess feels that Her Majesty the Queen could not possibly have been aware of the situation. Thus, she instructed me to request your assistance in acquainting Her Majesty the Queen with the facts regarding her papers, and have then returned to her. The announcement of a proposed visit by Lord Mountbatten, who wanted to discuss serious matters with her, caused the Duchess further emotional distress, and she remained deeply agitated. The Duchess of Windsor would greatly appreciate your help in again bringing the attention to Lord Mountbatten what Her Royal Highness had repeatedly stressed to him. The Duchess had made all necessary dispositions, and this has been done in accordance with the wishes of His late Royal Highness and her own. Therefore, the Duchess would appreciate if Lord Mountbatten would refrain from bringing this subject up again. In the name of the Duchess, I thank you in advance for your assistance. Charteris replied in May, hearing about the exchange and the threat of a renewed onslaught by Mountbatten. Amagat stressed the need to be vigilant on any matters in which Mountbatten was involved, but he was grateful that Charteris was being cooperative over the return of certain papers. He emphasized that nothing must remain with Sir Godfrey Morley. Sir Robin Mackworth Young put on record that the first consignment of papers had been handed over on the 15th of June, 1972, in the presence of the Duchess's solicitor, that the Duchess was in residence at the house and had received him. The movement of the papers was carried out with her full knowledge and permission, and indeed she helped me in locating the papers. The second consignment was handed over on 13th of December, 1972, again with her full knowledge and permission. On July 22nd, 1977, as a result of the exchange between Miss Schutz and Sir Martin Charteris, Sir Robin collected a third consignment, returning some originals from Windsor by mutual agreement. On that occasion, the Duchess was again in the house, but he did not see her as she was unwell. It is worth quoting his last paragraph. All these dates and transactions are confirmed by correspondence in the files of the parties concerned, and there is no truth in the allegations that some of His late Royal Highness's papers, now at Windsor, were removed from the Duchess's residence without her full knowledge when she was in England for the Duke's funeral. On the contrary, it was on that occasion that the disposal of the papers was discussed by the Queen and the Duchess, and the subsequent arrangements to move the papers were the result of that discussion. In September that year, Maitre Blum was still vexed by the question of the Duchess's papers and demanded a written statement by Miss Schutz to the effect that the original papers had been removed by Sir Robin and John Utter on the 15th of June, 1972. While the Duchess had gone with Miss Schutz to the beauty parlor, this, as we have seen, was nonsense. At Windsor Castle one evening in 1981, I had the chance to talk to Sir Robin Mackworth Young. His view was that it was fortunate that so many papers had come to the Royal Archives. He told me he was a black figure with Maitre Blum. While the sales apace, there was a further activity in the Duchess's house, none of which involved her personally. While she languished upstairs, huge bonfires were taking place in the garden. In April 1977, Amagat instructed Miss Schutz in writing to burn a great number of the Duke's financial papers in order that these would not be in the house when the Duchess died. Oh my gosh. She was burning papers. The Duke's papers. Wow. Okay. During the course of this operation, which took a long time, Georges, the butler, materialized in the office with a bundle of letters, which the Duchess had consigned to him. He told Miss Schultz that the Duchess had asked him to destroy these after her death, and he now wondered if she should burn them along with the Duke's papers. Miss Schutz took a cursory look at these documents and realized at once that they had historical value and should not be burned. They were letters between the Duke and the Duchess that had been written around the time of the abdication and after. Okay, these were very good letters, and they are of historical value, so it was very wise for her to save those. These letters had not been sent to Windsor with the others that were deposited in 1972. John Utter had drawn the Duchess's attention to them and asked her to look at them and decide what she wanted to do with them. Whether she wanted to keep them, whether she wanted to send them to the Royal Archives, or whether perhaps she even wanted to destroy them. The Duchess never felt strong enough to look at them. Later, she made her wishes known to Georges. On 30 April, Miss Schutz and Georges took the letters to Maitre Blum at the Rue de Varenne. Miss Schutz asked Blum what she intended to do with them. Blum told her that she would put them in a safe place. It never occurred to Miss Schutz that Blum would later cause these letters to be published, or she might benefit financially from their publication. Okay. The handing over of these papers inspired Blum to take an interest in any other such items that might still be found in the house. In July 1977, she started to go through the documents that had come back from Windsor. At the risk of restating matters, the Duchess herself was not troubled about where her papers were any more than she cared about the contents of Franz Donaldson's biography of the Duke. She was completely unaware of the 1978 television series or any of the other Windsors related books and articles that appeared in her widowhood years. But Blum was now in her stride. Regardless of the Duchess's views or state of health, Blum was ready to tell the world that the Duchess was furious. She would invoke her displeasure as an excuse for future litigation and give her the brief to publish the series of books that would appear from 1982 onward. In May 1977, Emma Gett, Miss Schultz, for having organized an inventory of the Duchess's books and again authorized her to destroy a considerable amount of bank receipts, bank statements, and correspondence relating to financial transactions concerned with the United States, Canada, Great Britain, and Switzerland. One day in July, she spent 12 hours burning papers. None of them had historical value. Everything was set for the Duchess to die. The plans were in place, but the Duchess did not die. Miss Schultz came in on Saturday to visit her. The summer she became so worried by what was happening that she sought Nate Cummings' advice and went to see Charles Tordham, the senior partner of Corday Fraise in the Champs-Élysées. For an hour she told him what was going on. Tordham did not offer much hope of rescue. The Duchess seemed to have no relatives of her own or eventual heirs with her family. She was no longer an American citizen. Miss Schultz wanted legal intervention on the grounds that the Duchess was helpless and someone was taking advantage of her. That is very key. But Tordham did not see how Joanna could pursue this herself. All he could do was advise her on how to protect herself over the jewels that Blum had taken. Lady Monckton had visited the Duchess on January 1977, after which she asked the Duchess's office should pay her travel expenses from London. Lady Monckton belonged to pre-Blum era. She was considered grand and rather arrogant. Even the Duchess found her hard going, though Lady Monckton considered herself to be the Duchess's best friend. As to visits, these were inconvenient. Blum declined her request for expenses and made sure that she never saw the Duchess again. In May, the Duchess was briefly a bit bitter, replying to questions from her nurse, sleeping better and eating well, but the improvement did not last long. Diana Moseley reported to Lady Monckton on what turned out to be her last visit in July. As Georges will have told you, I went to see the Duchess and I found her much worse than before. But in the house they said she was better. She must have been in a very bad way. She was pathetic, just staring in front of her, mouth open in a sad expression. I was at a loss. Georges said to talk to her. I did, but there was hardly any reaction. Anne Marie Bismarck also went to see her and found the same pathetic person. It really and truly wouldn't be worth you coming over unless she gets much better. I do not think she even enjoys seeing people. It's just an effort. The nurse I saw seemed very kind and gentle and spoke English. Georges, perfect as always. Thank heavens for him. I stayed 10 minutes. Another visit was from Miss Gilbert Miller, an old friend of the Duchess. In the years past, the story was told that Duchess had once telephoned her to ask her to lunch. Kitty Miller said, I am sorry, but my new clothes haven't arrived. The Duchess replied, Oh, Kitty, you are so clever. I don't even know where my last year's clothes are. It was Georges who took Kitty to the Duchess's bedside in contravention of the ban imposed by the doctors and Maitre Blum. I heard about this visit at the time, Kitty Miller telling a friend that the Duchess was in bed making no sense at all. Kitty Miller later told a journalist from the Daily Express that Georges had urged her to give the Duchess a little smile. She horrified that the Duchess no longer had monogrammed linen. Oh no, what a calamity. No monitored linen. The Duchess versus Blum. September 1977 was a turning point in the relationship between the Duchess and Mater Blum. The Duchess had clearly relied on Blum in her early widowhood, but she was also afraid of her, sometimes trembling when Blum was present. She was often made ill by Blum's visits with her continual doses of panic about expenses, panic about whether she could stay in her house, panic about legal documents thrust in front of her for her signature. If Blum deluded her into thinking that she was the Duchess's friend and protector, she was in for an unpleasant surprise. Blum came to see the Duchess, and the Duchess summoned up a sudden outburst of energy. She turned to the lawyer who had driven her to the state of such anxiety and illness and shouted at her. She's like, I hate you, directly at Blum. After Blum was careful to avoid the Duchess, at least until she was beyond the power of speech. It explains a later statement that Blum gave to the press. Right now, she's in a pretty sad state, and even I try not to bother her. Well, I wouldn't blame her for yelling at that lawyer. Nor would Blum allow anyone else to bother the Duchess, though some slipped past the cordon of security which she now had in place. As ever, Georges was the one who occasionally let in a visitor. Nate Cummings came to Paris in 1977. Miss Schutz suggested that he call Georges to arrange for him to see the Duchess. Cummings had not seen her for 2 years and reported that he found her looking extremely well, her health sustained by regular food intake. Maria had made her up with a little lipstick and put on some modest jewelry on her. Nevertheless, he wrote, when I come out of her room, I could not help but shed a tear, because as you well know, she speaks just barely above a whisper. However, she was fully conscious of my visiting her. Cummings said he would tell any inquirers that he believed the Duchess's health was much as before. Referring to the Duchess' rebuke to Blum, he wrote that he was delighted, adding, I hope she doesn't forget what she said. He hoped the Duchess would handle Blum with a firm hand. Wishing Joanna and Amuget could handle her affairs, perhaps helped by Charles Torham, but he recalled Torham telling him he had a lawsuit against Mater Blum several years ago. The thought that the Duchess could be saved from Blum was a vain hope. The Duchess would pay heavily for her. I hate you, remark. After that, she was kept a virtual prisoner in the house, while Blum did exactly as she pleased. This woman, this lawyer is she's evil. In my opinion, she's evil. Other visitors were less fortunate. Lady Monckton made a final attempt to see the Duchess. She wrote to Diana Moseley, who replied on 25 October. Yes, it's quite true that the doctors won't allow anyone to visit the Duchess. It appears that la tensions monte when friends appear. I haven't seen her since June. She looked terrible, then so sad and almost angry. She stared into space. Georges said I must tell her things. I tried, but there was hardly a flicker of recognition in response. I felt terribly sorry for Georges because it must be deeply depressing day after day. Diana Moseley remained concerned by the plight of the Duchess, blaming the doctors more than Blum. She told her friend James Lee Milne, I am so horrified by what is happening to the poor Duchess of W that I have joined the Voluntary Euthanasia Society. I'm afraid nobody can do much about her because all those cowardly doctors stick together, and as long as the heart beats, they pretend they're being brilliantly clever in saving life. One day, some brave doctor will have to break the spell. Until he does, Tito Franco, Duchess of Windsor, it doesn't bear of thinking. Some years after the Duchess died, Diana Moseley wrote to me, I think at the very beginning of the Duchess's illness, Blum did discourage visitors, but she was obeying the doctor. He was pestered by the nurses who had said that visits tired and excited her so that she couldn't sleep. A bore for them. Ditto vodka, but at this stage I thought it was a shame because she enjoyed visits and vodka. She should have them. Heaven knows her life was dreary enough with the nurses and tiresome secretary for company, but quite quickly she was really far beyond visits. At my last one, she never said a word. She just stared, looking wretched. After that, to want to see her was only idle curiosity and no pleasure at all to her. What I feel strongly is that her in-laws should have made a few efforts, not to pull the plug out, but to make quite certain that she was having anything that made her less unhappy. You can tell by the expression, even when the person is a vegetable. Only relations can do it. I had mobilized a world-famous neurosurgeon to give a second opinion. To this, she later added, it's all too awful, and I don't know, but I guess there might have been drugs to make her less happy, but they might not have been good for her in the sense that they might have shortened her life. So much the better, of course, you and I would say, but possibly not the doctor. Doctors have quite different ideas and ambitions for us. They feel triumphant as long as the patient is alive. At a certain point, Lady Moseley sought a meeting with the Prince of Wales to inform him of the Duchess's plight. It might have been as a result of that meeting that Michael Mann, the Dean of Windsor, took an interest in the Duchess and succeeded in visiting her. Michael Mann once described her condition as pitiable. In a television interview with Russell Hardy in 1980, Diana Moseley said she had not seen the Duchess for 3 years. She was pretty ill. I think she's very ill. She's not allowed to see her friends. When Hardy asked her if the Duchess knew, Diana Moseley replied, I doubt it. So that's the end of chapter 10. Again, this book is Behind Closed Doors. Behind Closed Doors, The Tragic Untold Story of the Duchess of Windsor. It's written by Hugo Vickers. He has been following the story and he's had this curiosity about the Duchess and the Duke of Windsor for quite some time. He's a really ethical and credible writer. So anybody that wants to read his book, you can. It's a long book. It's in 2 parts. One is on her last years, and part 2 is the story of Wallis Simpson from her birth until the time she met Prince Edward until the abdication. So that second part gets more juicier than the first part, but it's very sad, I think, the end of her life. And if you want to go read it, you can buy this on Amazon. It's $30, or in time, I think you'll see this book on Audible. the application audible, but I'm going to read it out because I think it's such an important piece of history to read the story of what happened to her, because she lived for 14 years. She lived a very sad, isolated life, and she was completely taken advantage of by her lawyer and a couple of other people. And when you don't have any children, when you don't have a good relationship with relatives, that's what happens. It's very sad. I'm in that generation where I'm taking care of, my mother is older, my aunt is older, and I'm taking care of them and calling them up. And when you're isolated from your friends and your family and you have nobody to take care of you, you are very vulnerable. And no matter the story or what side you're on, I feel very sorry for the Duchess of Windsor, because the Duke left her with a lot of money. He really left her with a lot of money, and it's so sad. He wanted her taken care of, and he took such good care of her during her life. So I'm going to read the next chapter, chapter 11, which is called Blum Closes In, and it covers the years 1977 to 1978. There are 3 chapters on Blum, Maitre Blum, and the way she gradually took over the Duchess's life. And I'm going to read the next chapter. I'm going to read that today. I'm going to take a break. These chapters are long, but they are very important for anybody that wants to listen to them. Thank you very much for listening. I will be back in a little bit to reread chapter 11.